I know how important incident response is, but my personal responsibility and that of the people I work most closely with is on prevention. We want, ideally, to keep the attacks from getting through and to keep them from doing damage. Do we have any questions yet?
Sure, folks can drop questions in the chat or just feel free to ask them. Julie, do you want to talk about your background a little bit? I know that you work for testing and cyber defense.
Yes, I work in TCD, testing and cyber defense. I've been at UW for about 2 years now. And before that, I worked in help desk at American Family. A little bit of IT background. When my original education was in journalism, and when that did not turn out to be an easy field to make a living in, I was looking for new ideas, and my computer got a virus. I didn't really have the money to take it to a professional, so the only way I could regain control was to erase the hard drive and reinstall Windows on my own. When that worked, with no recurrence, I realized I could look malicious software square in the monitor and win. And that got me interested in cybersecurity. And I ended up getting a network security degree at MATC, and then went on to work first in a help desk role at American Family, and now at UW in testing and cyber defense.
All right, Julie, we have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I see it.
Oh, you see it? Okay.
I was just reading that. I haven't seen that statistic personally, but the ransomware attacks I have personally seen have been Windows, yes. The victims, well, here at UW, we have more Windows computers than anything else. So obviously, statistically, the victim is likely to be a Windows machine. I have not personally been involved in a ransomware event that focused on Macs or Unix for that matter. I had not seen that particular statistic, but based on the experience I've had, that does ring true.
I guess I've heard that before too, that Macs don't get viruses as often. Like I just heard it, you know, anecdotally. I don't know if it's true, but I feel like I've heard it before.
Yeah, that was an advertising campaign. It is not true that they don't get viruses. That's specifically what the campaign is trying to point out. They're like, Macs never get viruses. I'm like, that is wrong. The my story from repair stuff and when I worked in as a student in the UW-Oshkosh was that we were like, well, that's totally not true. The first really big virus we got on Mac was literally called the AIDS virus, and it was not good.
I remember that virus. That was, in its time, that was a very destructive virus. It was not on the scale we have today, but we did not have the defenses we have today either. So those early ones, simple as they seem from the modern perspective, did a lot of harm. It is true that a Windows computer is more likely to have a mapped drive. And when they are mapped, they are very easy targets. That one of the most important things to remember when dealing with ransomware or being prepared for it is to have backups stored offline. Otherwise, they can just encrypt the backup along with the primary. You have to store your backups and then disconnect it from the network.
Yeah, Julie, I think the biggest takeaway I had from your presentation was that backups are the best way to prepare yourself for this.
That's the most important preparation, yes, because you
Mhm.
need, the data is what you need to get back most.
Mhm.
You can, other things can be replaced. You can download a fresh system image if you don't have one. And other things you can reconstruct, but the data is very difficult to get back if you don't have a good, complete, up-to-date backup. I've
So
heard
that
of,
makes, oh, go ahead.
I've heard stories, I don't, not ones I've been specifically involved in, but I've heard stories about whole groups of people having to scan in data from hard copies because they did not have an electronic backup, and it taking weeks.
That does not sound good.
That wasn't
that
what I
makes me
was
wonder, Julie,
involved
though,
in.
on my computer, like, is my computer backed up? I don't know. Like, this is I got this computer from work. Is it going to be backed up, or should I be doing something to back it up? I don't know.
I would ask your supervisor about that. I know mine is backed up through the department, but I don't know.
Okay.
It depends. What department are you in?
I work for the school business.
Yeah, you would have to ask your supervisor what steps are in place to back up local workstations.
Just lots of things. Sorry. And yes, there's opinions in there.
That one, that one is an interesting question. I see a couple came up at almost the same time. Windows servers, yes, ransomware does target Windows servers because they tend to be lucrative targets, I think is the right word. They tend to have a lot of data. They tend to have a lot of vulnerabilities, especially if they aren't being patched consistently. And yes, there are cross-platforms ransomware, and there are ransomware strains that are specific to both Mac and Linux. Generally, though, the biggest attacks use cross-platform software so that they can hit as much of a network systems as they possibly can. Their goal is to put people in a place where they have no choice but to pay ransom, and therefore they will try to encrypt everything if they can. That's why the importance of offline backups, which they can't get to. Russian virtual keyboard, I would not say that would be a particularly good tactic. It might stop a couple of specific strains that are designed not to hit Russian targets. But if they figure out that people that are not, because this particular gang does not target Russians, assuming, which is logical, and the general theory that the most widely accepted theory is they're located in Russia, and therefore they are not attacking Russian targets. One way they avoid that is checking for a keyboard in the Russian language. But if they realize that American and Western European are installing virtual keyboards in that language or that family of languages in an effort to trick them, they will stop using that check, or they'll find another way to check to make sure they don't attack Russians. So that trick wouldn't work for very long, if at all.
Yeah, this is the arms race thing, right? Where they do one thing, we do another thing. I think part of the description on that interesting one is that they were looking for the keyboard as a kind of a shortcut to figure out if it was somebody in their backyard, because they didn't want to attract the attention of the authorities in their backyard. Just like how if an operator in the United States doesn't want the FBI and CIA starting to look at them, but they're sort of okay with other countries looking, right?
Sort of. But
Sort of, yeah.
in America, there is a lot more, shall we say, desire to keep people from committing crimes against anybody. A lot less, I wouldn't say no, but a lot less tolerance of underhanded attacks on other countries, at least that we know about. I don't know what espionage may be doing. That's not my field, so I will not speculate. I certainly know that we have absolutely zero tolerance for terrorist attacks, no matter who they're committed against. If any American committed a ransomware attack, no matter what country was targeted, and the FBI found out about it, that person would be in prison. It doesn't matter who they attacked. Anything beyond that, since I don't work for the government, what I would say there would be pure speculation. Lucky backup is offline, yes. At least they keep that offline, and they keep it in a remote location.
Julie, have there been any ransomware attacks here at UW?
Yes,
Oh, really?
yes. Recent. There's some specifics I can't give because they're active investigations.
Well,
And specifically, I cannot name the department, but they have been significant.
well,
Multiple machines. There is one, again, I cannot give details because it's an active investigation and there are criminal charges involved. But there's one case where we did break it up prior to ransomware drop, but the evidence is overwhelmingly that this was going to be a ransomware attack. We detected it. If you've seen the slides, you've seen how long and how complex a process goes into these major network attacks like we saw at Colonial Pipeline. How much preparatory work these hackers do before they encrypt. And we discovered the attack while it was in progress, and we're able to prevent the ransomware drop. So yes, there is a possibility of defeating it at that stage. Not that the victims got away unscathed. There was a great deal they had to rebuild in order to eradicate the malware. So it was still a major recovery operation, but much easier and much more complete than it would have been if they had encrypted.
How did you detect that it was happening?
IT uses monitoring. On some systems, we use continuous monitoring, and that detected it. Ultimately, again, I can't give the whole story, but one of the most closely monitored systems ended up being included. They ended up trying to move laterally to a very closely monitored system. And we detected that and then started tracing it back to what else, where the attempted lateral movement was coming from. And ultimately found other machines that had been compromised already, and then started a major incident response to root out the attack. Cloud backups, that's a very useful part of ransomware defense because they are remote, but you have to also consider that they are on the network because they're in the cloud, so that the attacker might be able to get to them depending on how well you set up your cloud connections. Generally, the strongest ransomware defense backups are write once, such as a DVD or CD or something similar on a larger scale, that's written to once, taken out of the computer as a read-only device once set, and then stored somewhere secure. That's how I secure my personal data at home too. I do every month, I write to its DVD drive and then put it in a locked drawer. That way there's no way that an attacker could get to it unless they broke into my apartment, but they couldn't do it over the computer. There's another story here. When I was just starting my network security program, one of my fellow students had a ransomware encryption on his personal computer. This was just one machine, which made it a simpler case than a corporate network. But as an IT student, he had a system image and a recent offline data backup. He was back to doing his homework within 3 hours. And laughing until he realized that not everyone was that well prepared and how much harm this does on a larger scale. But he, at that point, demonstrated how much he'd already learned. It is possible, although on a larger scale, it wouldn't be that fast. If it's mapped, they're going to be able to encrypt it. That's one of the most important things I can stress here. If it's mapped, the local computer's operating system will treat that drive as if it was local. The same goes for mounted drives. If you've mounted or mapped a drive, your operating system's going to be treating it like it was local. And then the attackers will just get to it and encrypt it just like they would the internal drive. Those things, the old stand for local files, the old standby of saving to a USB stick and then taking it out of the computer is a simple trick, but it still works. Obviously, that's not always appropriate because there's other security risks to USB sticks. But for personal data, when it's not work, that can be the best way to do it. Of course, you also need a system image or the original installation media. That is a major challenge, David. When it's that big, multiple petabytes, Yes, backups are expensive, but they are necessary. Not just for ransomware either, but with that much information that's critical to a research project or mission critical to the university, that has to be backed up. And yes, it's expensive, but when you consider the value of that data and the potential impact if it's lost, that's a necessary expense. And good backup practice, offline, far enough away that the backup and the primary data will not be taken out by the same tornado. You have, with something that high value, you have to think of everything that could damage it.
Yeah, to add some clarification. One thing that we do in our group is we back up the source data, but a lot of the process data that we do is just so large that we just say, well, if we do have to recover this, we'll have to spend the months to reprocess this, but that's a risk we're willing to take.
If you're willing to take that risk, that's your decision.
Yeah, well, we just don't have the funding to back all of it up.
I can understand that. Certainly I can. But what you want to think about in your mind is how much it would cost. Ultimately, you get your basic risk versus gain formula. Likelihood, impact, and cost. If something is, basically what you're doing is saying that since there's a low probability that these large drives would be damaged, that you're willing to accept the risk of having to recreate the data from the original source. And that's obviously your department's decision. I'm not trying to be the heavy-handed do-it person and say you can't, you have to back it up. But if you think what it would cost to restore that data, how likely it is that you have to restore it, you decide that the cost trade-off is acceptable, essentially you're assuming the risk. And one thing I would certainly recommend if you're assuming risk like that is make sure that the machines are secure. Make sure, as I stressed in the presentation, that you've secured the data in other ways, such as keeping those machines patched and up to date, minimizing who has access to it, particularly write access, being careful with passwords and multi-factor authentication, not opening ports you don't have to, emphasizing and strengthening the basic cyber hygiene and protective measures to make sure that the likelihood is as low as possible. Is that data encrypted in any way?
No, it's not. Partially because it's sort of public, where anyone is like free to read it. It's more the right that's controlled.
Makes sense if it's meant to be available to a wide audience, obviously. That's every digital asset has a different purpose, and that's obviously the risks and the purpose have to be taken into account when protecting it. But the most important thing with something like what you're talking about is the continuity of the research and making sure that you're prepared to rebuild it, that you know what it would take to rebuild it, and you have that built into a disaster recovery plan. A lot of the time when people think how much they would have to rebuild, how long it would take, and things like stalled research and impact on reputation as a research institution, that brings a lot of people to rethink whether they can somehow find the money to back it up, or at least the most essential parts of it. But again, if the money isn't there, you can't really. The whole thing is, if the money isn't there, you need to find a workaround.
Yeah, I'd say, David, also that I guess that goes together. You said like about a month of time. That seems like a lot of time to spend if there is an incident. At least for me, it's kind of like the thing to check with everybody and maybe get some stuff in writing that everyone agrees that that's actually worth it. And then even in that case though, too, it's like there might be things you can do to optimize, like, does it actually need to take a month? Or, can we, if something did happen, we'd know as soon as possible when we need to start processing that to make it go as fast as possible or as quick as possible. I know just from like Bucky backup as an example, in the past, it's like we've always had like, oh, it's our safety net and whatever. And when it comes up that we do need to restore a system, because it does happen regardless of if it's, accident or, some update we did that didn't work right, or there's some malware issue or whatnot. There have been instances where the amount of data we needed to restore has been so large that we didn't realize how long it was going to actually take to run. And or that even the estimates from the Bucky backup team were like, oh, it should take 2 hours. And we've certainly had instances where there's some interesting technical reasons behind it, but that 2-hour restore, has taken 48 hours to run. And just to be clear, this is us like not practicing the act of, doing that restore. So we didn't know, because we never, we don't have like, 2 months, every 2 months we do this, and we know that it's going to take X amount of hours. But again, like everything else, there's probably something for trying to optimize, because if it's a month now, but you can do a few things and like know that you can get it down to 3 weeks or even 2 weeks, that whole how much time are we out of commission kind of thing goes down, which that makes it a more accept, right? So if it's 2 weeks instead of 4, that's 50%, it's 50% better, or 50% less time that it might be out.
Another thing to think about if you have to accept risk, and there are certainly places where risk just has to be accepted. This isn't the first one I've been aware of, obviously. If you have to accept a risk, is to think in advance who's going to do what. Who's going to start the restoration process? Where is it going to run with that volume of data, multiple petabytes? Where is the CPU to process that much data? If computers have been encrypted, do you have the CPU? And if you don't, where are you going to get it? Disaster recovery, although data may be the focus, getting the data back, getting it online, availability, confidentiality, access may be the focus, but there are other things that need to be restored and other resources that need to be available. I know what you're saying. I know it's backing up that much data is expensive, but I would really recommend that you look at how much it would cost to restore it, not just regenerating the data from the original from the original source like you were talking about, but the process of doing it, what would be available if your network is badly damaged.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand, and we've brought this up before, but we're actually having trouble just paying for the disk they're already using. So,
ouch. Ouch. You think of the value of the project and how much money has to be allocated to the storage of the data, and then to store it, to do a really high quality backup that's offline and stored remotely. That's a major expense. And if you really truly can do it, then make sure your systems are as secure as possible, updated, patched, limiting the number of people who have access, good passwords, multi-factor. I know I'm sounding like I'm preaching here, but ultimately, so much of security isn't esoteric knowledge. It's just following best practice all the time and making sure that anyone with access to sensitive data or anyone with administrative credentials is following those practices. So one administrator or even one standard user with access to sensitive data that has a dumb password, that can give a ransomware gang access to an entire department. Once they're in, they move laterally, they escalate their privileges. Once they get a toehold, they are very hard to stop. We've done it, but it was a major effort. It can
Yeah.
be stopped, but it's a major struggle.
Well, thanks, Julie. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise. This isn't a topic I don't know a lot about this topic, so it was great to learn about. And thanks everyone for joining the Q&A. It's 9:17, so it's time to move on.
Time to move on. Thanks for everyone for being here. And I hope that, especially Philip, I'd like to see if we can work more with you on this to see if there are options to reduce that risk.
Thank you.
Thank you.